It was in the early 70s. I brought my 3 children with me, and they were, the youngest one was 8 years old, the others were young teenagers, so there were 3 of them. And we lived actually in the rainforest, in about 20 miles from Gua Musang. It was a whole new experience. It was very special, and we right away, in those days, I mean now it's a little different, but in those days there was no electricity, no nothing. You got your water from the river, you had to boil your water in order to have water to drink and so on. So we were, as much as we could, very much living their life. In terms of, we were in a small village with 5 other houses. We had a house built for us, a stilt house, made of bamboo and atap thatch and so on. And often they would come to our house because it was stronger than theirs sometimes to do the dancing and so on. So our house often became quite a communal house, which was interesting. And we learnt about their value system. And this was very important because the Temiars, which are the group that I was studying, have an ethos of non-violence. They're not competitive. If they show any competitiveness, it's something they've learned later in schools. Their own tradition is a non-competitive one. So you never see children wanting to do better than somebody else or wanting to take something that belongs to somebody else. They're just not like that. And people sometimes think I'm idealizing them. But you actually have to have visited to know that that's true. They are not competitive, they don't hit their children. And occasionally, if they did hit their children, they would be very, very remorseful. Now, because they are animistic, and they believe in the power of thunder and the power of tiger, they don't need anything else to keep their children under control. Because children are scared of tiger and thunder. So it means that parents can be very loving and warm and so on. Yeah? Sadly, of course, a lot of that has changed because the rainforests, as we know, are being chopped down and oil palms are being planted instead. And this is something I feel very strongly about, destroying the Orang Asli habitat in the name of commerce. Why? After all, they were here from far, far earlier than any other race at all. They're very good at conservation, they use the land well, they don't cause subsidence, they don't cause mudslides, they know how to grow crops in the best way, you know? And I think people could learn a lot from the Orang Asli, both in terms of their attitude towards the environment, which I think is very important, but also their techniques and their skills of healing. I mean, my youngest son had a major healing from one of the shaman while we were here, because he was 8 years old at the time and developed a very high fever, that, you know, sort of fever when children's eyes go glazed. I was extremely worried, and we were way upriver right in the Ulu. Okay. And I decided I better bring him out and take him to KL, to hospital. But before we left, one of the big shaman at the village said, did I want him to try his medicine first before we left? So I said, fine, but, you know, we can't stay for long treatment because we have to go. He said, don't worry. He said, and these are his very words, he said, I will ask one of my friends to look after you when you leave here. And I was thinking that downriver there'd be another shaman who would help. Yeah? So he did some massage of Hal's head and his tummy and said various jampy. And Hal was already looking a tiny bit better. We left in the boat and wrapped up Hal well. I had a boatman who brought his log boat and we were going down the river. And this enormous brown bird came out of the forest, circled the boat with his huge wings and flew back again. And the boatman said, "You see, he said one of his friends would look after your son." I said, "Oh, don't be ridiculous." I said, that's nonsense. He said, "Right, you wait and see." And you know, this bird followed us all the way home. Every few miles it came out of the forest, huge wingspan, circled the boat, and then flew off again. And when we got to our house, it flew away. Now, Hal got better very, very rapidly. So I am convinced there was some healing energy of the earth between the shaman and the bird and so on. Because I decided to take Hal to hospital anyway for an examination. And the doctor there said, "Wow," he said, "that's been a nasty infection." I said, "What?" He said, "Well, the scar tissue in your son's throat, he's obviously had a very serious ear, nose and throat infection." He said, "What medicine did you have?" Thinking we'd had antibiotic. I said, "Well, nothing yet, nothing Western." And he looked at me in disbelief. He said, "You mean to tell me your son has recovered without antibiotic?" I said, "Yeah." And that was for a mother, that was such an important experience. That's never left me from my time here, even though it was more than 20 years ago. Knowing that deep, deep down the Orang Asli have this natural power. And it saddens me greatly when I come back and find that that's disappearing. Because there are far fewer shaman now, far fewer. You have to really look for one, and many of them don't even admit their skills anymore. I find a lot of depression amongst the Orang Asli, a shutting down, a survival mode almost. And I was adopted into the tribe, you see, and my tribal mother died a few years ago. And I went to see her, luckily I went to see her in time, because she died a few months later. And she was an amazing old lady, and she was a village midwife. And one day she said to me, "There are far too many babies being born, will you help?" So I said, "Well, I'm not a midwife." And she said, "You've had children, of course you know what to do," she said. So I became assistant midwife, which was quite interesting. And then she said to my daughter, who was 12, she said, "And you can help as well," she said. There we were both as assistant midwives in the village. But it meant we were seeing life from the beginning, which was very exciting because their childbirth practice is very different from any other I've witnessed. So that was good, and my mother was a really skilled. She could look at a girl and she would say to me, "She's pregnant." And I would say, "How do you know?" She said, "Oh, I know." She got that natural intuition, you know? And sometimes the girl wouldn't even know herself that she was pregnant, yeah? And what saddened me when I went to visit her before she died was that all the forest around, where it was a tiny village with her son and her daughter in two houses and another house a little way away. And you could hear the machinery cutting down the forest. Sitting in her house, you could actually hear the machines, and it was getting closer and closer and closer. And I thought, surely people don't need to do this. Surely they do not need to destroy the rainforest. And that remains one of my big sadnesses about Malaysia. I love it here. I love the country. I love the people. But I still think the Orang Asli get a very raw deal in terms of the economy, in terms of land and so on. Not so much with these kids, but if I look back to the time with the Temiars, I learnt so much then. Because what I learnt so much was the nurture, carrying the baby in the sarong, carrying it on the back in the sarong when it's a little bit bigger, breastfeeding till 4 years old. All the rhythmic activity that happens. I mean, rhythmic play happens from birth, because they're having the singing, mothers are beating the music on the log with the bamboo. So just think what that's doing to the rhythmic play of the child from a very, very early age. So really it's there. In terms of, and I still think we've got so much to learn from Aslian tribes. But neurodramatic play for me is being alert to really what goes on from conception to 6 months. And I think that time is very much neglected by specialists. There are a few people working with mothers and babies, but not many. They tend to work with children later when there's been difficulties. Whereas if we could really support mothers and their babies to stay together for a bit longer. I was just being told by somebody else about mothers that put the babies in a boarding house Monday to Friday and only have them home at weekends as babies. Now, that is so shocking. And I think it's very sad, and I think nobody is educating mothers that they could do all this another way. Yeah. If families are hard up, mothers need to be paid to stay at home for 2 years, then go back to their career. And I think that would work in a much more constructive and creative way,